Hey, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and in this video tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to make a mesh tote bag. Now for this mesh tote bag, it's going to be a great beginner-friendly project. We use minimal supplies and we finish it all off with French seams, so you won't have any exposed raw edges anywhere in the bag. So first let's go over the finished bag measurements. So from left to right here, it's going to measure about 15.5 inches. Then the height is going to be just about 14 inches. And then with the boxed corners here, we're going to say the depth is right around 4 inches. Now that we're done with the measurements, let's jump into the supplies. The main body of the bag is made up of mesh fabric, and we sell this one in a ton of different colors, so the link is below for that. You'll need some cotton fabric for the 2 strips at the top of the bag. We're going to interface that cotton fabric with some woven fusible cotton interfacing, and I'll include a link for that as well. Then the straps, I like to use the polypropylene or nylon webbing. You want to take a lighter and just kind of melt down and fuse the cut edges so that it doesn't fray on you. So just take a couple seconds to do that. And then for the thread, I like to use a good quality 100% polyester thread for my bags, but a cotton thread will work as well. Now let's get to cutting. From your cotton fabric, you'll need 2 strips that measure 5 inches by 18 inches. Then take the 100% cotton woven fusible interfacing and cut a corresponding strip for each one of your cotton pieces. I like to use the fabric strip itself as the template, so I'll just place it on my interfacing, making sure that I have the interfacing placed with the adhesive side going up. I'll place both of these here, cut around it, and then we'll head over to the ironing board so we can fuse the pieces together. I like to spray my fabric with a little bit of water, and then I'll go in and press it with the heat of a hot dry iron, and that helps fuse everything in place. Depending on the interfacing that you're using, just make sure that you reference the manufacturer's instructions so you know how they recommend that you fuse the fabric to that specific interfacing. Now for the mesh, one of our packs of mesh includes a piece that's about 18 inches by 54 inches. So I'm leaving it folded in half, and then I'm just going to cut away the little bit here on the right side to separate it. I'm cutting away the fold line, and that will give me 2 identical pieces. After I cut here, you'll see that you have 2 identical pieces left over, and this is enough to actually make 2 of these bags. So just grab one piece. This is how it will be folded, and we're going to finish off the top short edge here with our cotton fabric next. Flip one cotton strip pretty side face down onto the edge of the mesh fabric, and then we're going to grab some clips and clip all the way down that top edge here. Now we'll stitch this up. I've set my straight stitch length to about 2 millimeters in length, and I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we'll give this a press to help set those stitches. Then we're going to flip that cotton strip up, and we're going to press it again, but make sure that the seam allowance is going up towards the back side of the cotton fabric. And this can be a little tricky because the mesh is a lot flimsier than the cotton fabric, so just use your fingers to help you push that seam allowance up. If you have a wooden tailor's clapper, it comes in really handy here to help you set that seam allowance exactly where you want it. Now flip it over, give it another press from that side just to make sure it's lying nice and flat against the cotton fabric side. Now we're going to take the opposite edge of the cotton fabric and fold that edge under by the same seam allowance that you just sewed, so 1/2 inch. Give that a really good press. Again, set it with your tailor's clapper if you have one. If you don't, I'll have a link in the description box below on where you can order from us. And then we're going to fold the whole thing in half. I want you to match up the newly folded edge right over top of the seam allowance from the seam that you just sewed. Give that a press and set that into place. This is going to ensure that we have no raw edges exposed in that area. So again, it's being folded right over top of the previous seam allowance. Now, one tip here is to use a washable glue and do a glue basting technique. That will help set it in place. Once you dry the glue by setting it with the hot iron, it's going to hold everything together for you without the need for pins. Now back to the sewing machine, we're going to top stitch from the pretty side. So flip it right here 1/8 of an inch up from where the mesh meets the cotton fabric. And I want to lengthen my stitch length here. Whenever it's top stitching, I usually use about a 3mm length straight stitch and just do that all the way down. This is going to hold all the layers together. Again, making sure we have no raw edges. Now after we sew, we press, so give that a good press on both sides to help set all those stitches and keep everything nice and flat. And then I'm going to show you a close-up. So if you did a good job folding over your edges and top stitching, it should look about the same on either side. So it won't really matter which side you choose to be the right side or wrong side of your bag. Now, as you probably imagined, we're going to repeat the exact same steps with the remaining cotton strip and the opposite side of our mesh fabric. So clip it, sew it down, and do all the steps that I just showed you. Right, so now your bag panel should look something like this. We're going to fold it up in half. Make sure that you match where the cotton fabric intersects right there and place some clips, and then continue to place your clips down both sides of what will eventually be our finished tote bag. Next, you'll use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to stitch down both of the sides that you just clipped together. And this is technically the first seam that you're going to sew out of 2 seams that will create our French seams. So technically you would be sewing your bag together wrong sides touching, but remember I said early on, if you did a good job with your cotton fabric strips, it should look identical both on the right side and the wrong side of your bag. So 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here, we're stitching all the way down and shorten that stitch length because you want to make sure that it's grabbing all those open spaces in the mesh fabric. So go nice and slow to keep everything aligned. Then we're going to do the same thing to the opposite side. Now flip the bag right side out. All right, poke out everything to the corners. And I'm going to give this a good press just so that I have everything flat where it needs to be, because next we're going to head back to the sewing machine to stitch the second part of a French seam. And you need to have it nice and flat so you can follow the edge of the fabric right there along your stitch guide for the seam allowance that you'll be using. Now for sewing down the side seams again, you'll want to use a bigger seam allowance than we just used. So if we sewed the first seam at a 1/4 of an inch, for this one we're going to want to sew about 3/8 to 1/2 of an inch. And what that's going to do is allow us to encase the first seam that we sewed inside of this next one. That's how you do a French seam, so you don't end up with any raw seams on the inside or outside of your bag. Do your best to help everything stay aligned at the beginning and at the ends of your seams, and I also like to backstitch at the beginning and end. So here I flipped it over and I'm sewing the opposite side. I backstitch at the beginning, and I will do the same thing here, making sure that all my fabric matches up right till the end. Now let's give it a press since we're done sewing up the French seams to the sides of our bag. And next up, we are going to box the corners. So these 2 corners, I'm going to turn it to its side here, insert my hand so that the side seam is running right down my middle finger and it's nice and centered, and we create this little triangular end. Place a clip on either side. Then I'm going to flip it to place it on my cutting table here, and each box measures 1 inch, so you'll want to go in 2 inches and mark a line. So from that tip over 2 inches, I'm going to place it there, make sure that the side seam is running right down the middle, and I'll use a ruler to keep that line nice and straight and a chalk marker. Place another clip on either side or in the center there, and that line that we marked out, that you can barely see there, but I can see it at the sewing machine, is going to be our stitch line. So repeat the steps to draw the little line on the opposite box corner that we're going to create, 2 inches down from that little triangle tip. Then we'll head over to the sewing machine. We're going to back stitch at the beginning and end and stitch just on the line that we drew. So now everything has been sewn. We have our box bottom. You'll want to flip the bag right side out and give it a good press. After everything is nice and flat, you can see the finished shape of the bag, and the last step we have to do is to attach our handles. Now for attaching our handles, we will be sewing them to the inside of the top fabric strip. So measure over from the side seams 4 inches. 4 inches over, I'm going to mark a little line here with my chalk marker, and then I'll use that mark to align my webbing to the inside of that mark. Trace along both sides of your webbing, and that just helps visualize where it needs to be exactly, so that when I get to the sewing machine, it makes it easier for me. Then I'll place a clip on either side to hold that, and the bottom edge should reach all the way to the bottom of the cotton fabric. Do the same thing to the opposite side. You'll see I measure 4 inches over here. Make that mark, and you'll do the same thing with the webbing. Make that line reach from the top of the cotton fabric strip to the bottom. Run your fingers through your webbing strap so that there's no twists, and then place it to the inside of that 4-inch mark again. Trace both sides, place some clips, and then we'll be ready to stitch these into place. Now for sewing this, I'm going to stitch with a straight stitch a rectangular box on the end of the webbing strap like you see here, with a big X inside of it. So you'll stitch all the way around, a big X inside, and that will keep those handles secured in place. Now, as you probably imagine, we need to attach the other handle to the opposite side. So you could go through and do the measuring and marking again, or you can do what I'm doing here and use the first attached handle as your guide to line up the new one where it needs to be directly across from it. So basically mirror imaged. And again, double check that you don't have any twists in your handle before you clip it in place and head over to sew it down. And there you have it, the finished mesh tote bag, perfect for going to the pool, the beach, a farmer's market, or even for toting around groceries or library books. If you enjoyed the video tutorial, make sure to give it a thumbs up, let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. If you need the supplies I used in the video, the link is in the description box below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.